Good afternoon, and we are very excited to be here as the Mad River Valley Libraries. I'm Corey Stevenson. I'm the director of the Moortown Library. We have Marie Schmuckel from the Warren Public Library and Siobhan Travers from the Jocelyn Memorial Library. And we're back for another round of book recommendations. This time around, we're calling it the Sweater Weather Reads, as we picked some titles that are good for these colder, darker months ahead. The first title we wanted to highlight was Gather by Kenneth M. Cadeau. And this is actually the Vermont Reads title of 2024. And Vermont Reads, I just need to get my notes so I can remember the dates, but since 2003, the Vermont Humanities has invited students, adults, and seniors across the state to read the same book and participate in a wide variety of community activities related to the book's themes. And as the Mad River Valley Libraries, we have collaborated on Vermont Reads for the last handful of years. So we have copies available at all three libraries to check it out and read it, and we're hosting 3 related programs. But I'll tell you a little bit about the book first. So it's a young adult novel. The author is actually a high school principal here in Vermont. And it's about a young teenager named Ian. He's resourceful and he's in rural Vermont. He isn't supposed to have a dog, but his adopted pup Gather, who's on the cover here, soon becomes a good friend. Although he hasn't yet finished high school, Ian works hard to take care of his mother, who's trying to overcome her addiction to opioids. Above all, Ian wants his family to remain on the land where they have lived for generations. But after a tragedy, he and Gather leave Vermont. Living on the run, Ian draws on his well-honed survival skills to care for himself and his dog. At the same time, there's a whole community in his town that are coming together to try to provide a way home for Ian and Gather. I found this to be a very timely and compelling book with some of the issues our state faces. And while this topic is really tough, I enjoyed the voice of Ian and the portrait of the community he lives in, including the generational Vermonters and newer arrivals and the care that they all have for each other. So I definitely recommend this. It's one of my favorite Vermont Reads books in a while.
And if I'll just add,
yes,
it's gotten national accolades. It's not just a Vermont author, a Vermont book, but it just won the Kyrgyz Prize. It was a National Book Award finalist, so it's very well regarded.
Yes, and it's good. So as I mentioned, we're hosting 3 related programs. Just last night, we welcomed Will Eberly as a Vermont Humanities speaker to speak about A Bridge Across 2 Vermonts and looking at some of the issues that divide our communities and how we can come together around them. Then we are partnering with the Friends of the Mad River for a hike at the Moortown Town Forest on Sunday, November 3rd at 1 o'clock. I'll lead that with Luke Foley from the Friends of the Mad River. We'll have our naturalist hats on, and we'll explore what we can gather from and give to our place. And then finally, we're hosting a book discussion, a discussion of the actual book at the Warren Public Library on Monday, November 18th at 6 p.m. So that's the first book for this season. And Marie's going to tell us about some other books.
Yeah, so a lot of new books come out in the fall in time for holiday gift giving. And so just very quickly, I wanted to just list through some of the hot new releases, books that we're seeing in demand for our holds list at the libraries and just patrons inquiring. So we have Sally Rooney, Intermezzo, T.J. Klune, Somewhere Beyond the Sea. This is the follow-up to House in the Cerulean Sea, which is one of my personal favorite reads for the last 5 or so years. Leanne Moriarty, Here One Moment. This is our large print edition, just to remind people that we do have large print books at our libraries. Olga Tokarzuk, The Impusium. She wrote Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, which was that was her big book. Jodi Picoult, By Any Other Name, which is historical fiction, which is a little different for Jodi Picoult, I think. And then some other titles. Ina Garten has a new memoir, Be Ready When the Luck Happens. Elizabeth Strout, Tell Me Everything. Richard Powers, Playground. And then in nonfiction, we have Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Message, and Yuval Noah Harari, Nexus. He's the one that wrote Sapiens and Homo Deus. And then upcoming next week, the new Louise Penny comes out, and I'm sure all three of us will have that in our libraries.
It's ordered.
Yes,
That doesn't mean
mine
it's here
is on
yet.
order as
Yeah.
well. And then Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, has a new book coming out in November, Serviceberry, Abundance and Reciprocity in the Natural World. So that's just a quick little flurry of some of the new books that we have coming out that have come out recently or about to come out. So my first book that I'm going to talk about, though, is There Are Rivers in the Sky. It's by Elif Shafak. There are 3 timelines in this book. There's 19th century London. A boy is born on the banks of the Thames. Actually, the very first opening scene is a drop of water falling onto a Mesopotamian king. And this drop of water is a kind of the thread. Water is the thread through the whole book, but it starts with the drop of water. And then we have rivers. So we have the Thames, and then another timeline that story is being told is the story of Nareen, who is a 10-year-old Yazidi girl who lives along the Tigris River, and that's 2014, which is, if you remember current events from 10 years ago, is when the Yazidis were being driven out and being a genocide, basically, from ISIS. So we're on the brink of that happening in her storyline. And then 2018, we're back in London, and a woman in her 30s, just in her first scene, she is moving onto a houseboat on the Thames, and she is a hydrologist, water scientist. So we get a lot of science, too, in this book, but it's also a lot of historical fiction, some things based on real events. I would recommend this for anyone who liked Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr, or Geraldine Brooks' People of the Book or Horse, that kind of, you keep reading to know how are these stories going to connect to each other, because they're going to connect. As I always tell people, I am an audiobook listener, so I was actually excited to look at the physical book, because I noticed that the chapters are the Arthur, so that's our 19th century London boy. His chapters have an O at the top of them, and then the 2 women, Nareen and Zalika, have H's, so they're the 2 H's, and he's the O for the water molecule.
Oh,
so I just thought that was so clever.
That's very clever.
I just saw that today.
Yeah.
So there's my first book. There Are Rivers in the Sky.
Great. Thank you, Marie. So I want to talk about Long Island, which is fiction, and it's actually a sequel for his previous book, Brooklyn. And this is Tobin's. Tobin. It's a Gaelic way of pronunciation, so I'm trying to practice this. And I love this book. It takes place about 25 years after Eilish, and that is the main character in both of these books. Eilish is now living in New York with her husband, Tony, and she lives right next door to all of Tony's Italian-American family. And her life has been pretty everyday for the last 20-some years until a gentleman knocks on her door and gives her news that she was totally not expecting, and she's pretty distraught. And she hasn't been back to Ireland in all of these years. She had come over from Ireland. That's part of what happens in Brooklyn. And I never read that book, but I did see the movie, which I absolutely loved.
I didn't know there was a movie of it.
Yes, and it's a gorgeous movie because it has all the beautiful colors of Ireland. And so what does she do? Hey, it's time to finally go home, go back and visit her mother, who's now turning 80, and see what might be happening back in her old hometown. So lots of things come up as she shows up back there, including some former relationships and including some problems with a best girlfriend of hers from way back when. So there's a good ending to it.
So can I ask you the question I always get? can you read the second one without having read the first one?
Absolutely, because I
You
hadn't
felt
read.
like it was
Yeah.
Standalone.
standalone. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to dive into some nonfiction and actually use my glasses this time. I haven't read this book yet, but it's definitely on my list as a scientist type person, and it's called Sharks Don't Sink, Adventures of a Rogue Shark Scientist, and it's by Jasmine Graham. It's a nonfiction memoir, and it's interesting in that it sort of interweaves the story of sharks and the author's experience as a black scientist in a very male-dominated white system. And the very first sentence in the prologue reads, "My life was changed forever by a single photograph. It was of a black female researcher floating underwater with an adorable nurse shark." So right there, you know, she really likes sharks because it was adorable. But when she saw that photo during the pandemic on Twitter, Black in Nature, hashtag, Jasmine was on the verge of leaving science. She was burned out from the constant energy required for her to fight for space in the world of academia. But through that photo, she was able to connect with several other black female scientists and create a group, Minorities and Shark Sciences, or MISS, which helped bring together and lift up many other young shark scientists of color. Since then, Jasmine has gone rogue, working outside of the traditional academia system that wasn't made for or supportive of her to create another way. And this book is really a story of that first rogue field season and her journey getting to be a shark scientist as a young black woman. And of course, it's about sharks too, who have survived and thrived over millennia and are often an overlooked group of animals in the ocean. So it's also nice and short.
And Corey, does that make you want to be a shark scientist?
Well, I've always felt like sharks have gotten a pretty bad rap. You talk about encounters with sharks. Sharks are way more likely to die than people in terms of number of deaths of people versus number of deaths of shark in any given year.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. In the animal theme, my next book is The Axeman's Carnival, and it is by Catherine Chidgey, and she is a New Zealand author. And this is fiction, and it is written from the perspective of a magpie named Tama, which is short for Tamagotchi, for those who remember Tamagotchi toys, which are little electronic pets that you'd have to feed and whatever, take care of. So a woman who lives in New Zealand is our protagonist, and Marnie, and she rescues Tama. Tama has fallen out of the nest, so she picks Tama up and raises Tama in her house, tries to release Tama back, but Tama becomes this character who's stuck between worlds because he tries to go back to his family and they don't really want him because he smells like her, and so he goes back to her. And through his story or his telling, we learn a lot about her. She's in an abusive relationship. Her husband is verbally, physically abusive to her. She's had a pregnancy loss, and Tama becomes this kind of surrogate child to her. And in the meantime, he also is mimicking because he's a corvid and they can mimic, and so he'll interject some of the most ridiculous phrases at times, just to kind of add levity to the situation. But anyway, it's a really lovely story. The Axeman, I think it's actually, the title is a little, I don't want to say misleading, but you kind of what is this title saying? So Marnie's husband he participates in axeman competitions.
And so throwing axes?
Well, hewing, cutting through logs. And so it's all leading up to the Axeman's Carnival when he's preparing for this competition and hoping to win money because they live on a farm in New Zealand and they're barely scraping by. And a big part of it is that Marnie ends up has the nursery cam that she had for the baby that she lost, and she ends up turning that into a camera on the magpie, and she goes viral. So all of a sudden, they're bringing money in from going viral, and but that creates its own tension in her household because it's not a great situation. So anyway, so it explores that as well, the whole kind of like, what does it mean to go viral, and then capitalize on that. And anyway, it covers a lot of ground, and I think, it reminded me kind of Remarkably Bright Creatures.
I was going to ask, is it like the octopus point of view?
It is like the octopus point of view in Remarkably Bright Creatures, absolutely. Or even in Lessons in Chemistry, we had 6:30, point of view going on. So anyway, just, if you like, I happen to like books where you get the animal point of view, like Remarkably Bright Creatures, so this was right up my alley.
Nice.
All right, I'm going to talk about John Grissom's Camino Ghosts. Did all of you read this or not?
I have not read it. No.
Tell us about it.
Okay, I will. And I'm going to use my glasses. So our book group read this earlier this past summer. But this book is historical fiction and drama, and it's a story about Dark Isle, which was an island off the coast of Florida where one of the slave ships had crashed, and the owners of the ship were no longer around, and all of the people who had been captured had to figure out, those who survived in this shipwreck, how to get out of this boat, and then they made their way to this island. So it covers the generations of those individuals who lived on the island. But now there is no one who's really living on that island. It's supposedly haunted, and if anyone goes onto this island that is not of color, they often don't come back. There's all sorts of mystery about this and the ghosts. And there's an author that's in a local community off the coast of Florida. She hears about this story. It's a story of Lovely Jackson, who lived on the island with her mother. They were the last two people who lived on the island. And now there's a company, of course, a development company that wants to buy the island and put up lots of condominiums. And Lovely is an elderly woman, and that's where John Grissom brings in his lawyer part of the story.
For that part to come on.
Yes, right.
So there's a court case.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Great.
Awesome.
I think I'm going to skip over to an older title. It was published last September, so maybe some of you have read this. But to me, it's one of my top reads in the last few years, and it makes a great book for sweater weather. It has lots of connections and deep thoughts to ponder. It is North Woods by Daniel Mason. And it's essentially the story of a piece of land in the woods of northern Massachusetts over the course of 400 years and the human and other inhabitants that spend time on it. And it begins with two lovers that are running away from a Puritan colony to start a life of their own, and then wends its way through times of revolution, apple orchards, a landscape painter, an impassioned beetle, so it's not just people, and many others. The style, I also found it very interesting. It has a few songs mixed throughout and some visuals. I had meant to bookmark this particular visual. So there's just all sorts of weird little interesting diagrams and visuals. I kind of reminded me of other expansive titles like The Overstory by Richard Powers, who has the new book out, or Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. And there's just a lot to think about and a lot to digest, and you really feel right at home in these New England woods. So that's definitely been a top pick for me in the last few years.
Agree.
Yeah.
Pour yourself a cup of cider to
Right.
read that one.
Make someone else read it so you can discuss
Yes.
it or talk to someone who's already read it. It has gotten a lot of awards, also a lot of best book of the year kind of titles and such.
All right. Lastly, I have Richard Osman, We Solve Murders. Richard Osman is the author of very popular in Warren Thursday Murder Club series, which is actually just being turned into a TV show with an all-star cast. But this is a new series by him, so we get a new set of characters introduced, including the cat on the cover, whose name is Trouble. So we have, let me get my notes, Steve, who is a retired detective who now dabbles in, just some like investigating who's getting into my trash, like this very small town English kind of like things. He's enjoying retirement. And his daughter-in-law, Amy, who is a private security contractor for the rich and famous. So she's traveling the world all the time, and she's, rubbing elbows with all sorts of people. And she calls him because she finds herself in a bit of a fix. Somebody's trying to kill her. And so she and her current client, who is an author, an older lady, though she would not admit that herself, and it a few times refers to her as the most prolific author or most famous author besides Lee Child. There's some so she's supposed to be this very, big, very rich author. So the author, Amy, flies Steve over to the United States from England to try and rope him into helping her figure out who's trying to kill her. So it's very fast-paced. You're flying all over the world. You're in Dubai, you're in St. Lucia, you're going all over the place in this book. I would say, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love Richard Osman. I love his characters. I love how he writes them. This book definitely feels like a first book in a series. A lot
of loose ends.
Not loose ends, but a lot of character setting the scene of the characters. The plot to me was kind of okay, you've got these influencers who are dying or getting killed, and Amy's on, it's just, to me, it was more of just the character development and finding out who all these people are and wondering who's going to be in the next book, because you end up with some favorites. There's by the end, you've got an A-lister Hollywood star, a Russian oligarch, assorted killers for hire, and then you've got Steve's neighbors back home in this little English village, and all Steve wants to do is get back home in time for weekly pub trivia, which I thought was so funny.
A little nod to our trivia nights.
Little nod to our trivia nights. Yes. I could relate, Steve. He just wants to get back to his routine, but he also, he misses a little bit of the excitement. So anyway, We Solve Murders, Richard Osman.
All right. My last book is Night Watch by Jane Ann Phillips, and she won the Pulitzer Prize in 2024 for this book, and neither one of you have read it as of yet, right? Okay. I was smitten because she went to West Virginia University, as did I. She's a few years older. I had never heard of this author before. I don't know if either of you have. She's written plenty over the years. The other reason I'm smitten is because it takes place in West Virginia, and it takes place 10 years after the Civil War, and it also goes back to 1864, back and forth, 1864 to 1874, when this family who has come together to fight for the Union, they all lose each other. And the story really, there are a couple main characters. Eliza is the mother, and she ends up not being able to speak at all. She decides that's the best way to cope, because a man comes into their home, and it's pretty devastating what he takes advantage of with her over the years. And Coralie is her daughter, who grows up for a while thinking this man is her papa, but he's not. But when Mom no longer will speak, and Coralie, there are babies that are coming, and Coralie is taking care of the babies, Mom can't do it, this man finally decides, time to send them off to the asylum, and he drops them at the door. So a lot of this story takes place inside this asylum that was in West Virginia and is now a National Historic building, monument. It her language is it's beautiful, even though there is plenty of violence and plenty of disturbance that you may feel if you read this. But it all weaves together. It's very mesmerizing. So.
And why particularly would you be interested in a Civil War story right now, Siobhan?
Thank you.
Way to provide the lead-in.
Joslyn Memorial Library is hosting 2 days of a production called Keep Up Good Courage, Friday, November 8th at 7 o'clock and Sunday afternoon, November 10th at 2 o'clock at the Valley Players. And author Alice Evans and I found this trove of letters from a couple from the Mad River Valley that wrote back and forth to each other for 9 months. And we also found a diary of Edwin Palmer, who's from Waitsfield, and we also found Samuel Jackson Dana's letters. So they've now all been woven into a story that got even bigger when the Songbird Project, which are 2 local musicians, said, we'll add music to this. And so that's what's happening. It's going to be about 90 minutes in length, and there'll be an intermission, and there'll be photographs, and we might even have a drummer.
So this is Waitsfield history, Civil War history. It's all, yeah.
And is this, Alice wrote a book not too long ago also, yes?
Alice wrote Our Suffering Brave.
Yes.
And that sort of got me interested in this. And I thought about having this play take place because the monument to the Civil War soldiers in Waitsfield is right next to the theater, the Valley Players Theater. I thought we would have, they would all get together when the monument was placed. But it wasn't placed till 1907. The majority of the men
were gone.
They were gone. So instead, we found this other story and the men that are in this story and what happens along the way. They're in the 9-month unit, and they're bored, and they're fishing, and they're eating strawberries, and they're dying of the measles. And then all of a sudden, some real excitement takes place. So see it if you can.
I was going to say, you should check it out.
Thanks, Siobhan.
Yeah.
So that sort of concludes our book recommendations. And as always, we're all very happy if you come into our library looking for a good read to point you in a direction, depending on what you like.
And if you have any interest in any of our programs, you can visit any of our websites. I'm warrenlibrary.com.
I'm JoslynMemorialLibrary.com.
And moretownlibrary.com.
Yeah, and you can find all the information about our joint programs, our solo programs, and
Thank
look forward to seeing you.